Hello, dear listener, and welcome to our tale of unknown stories of soldiers who never returned. American Civil War, 1861 to 1865. Night lays a calm hand across the map, smoothing the fray of day into a softer cloth. Lamps take the courage down to a glow. Windows turn into quiet mirrors where faces meet themselves and make peace. In this hush between wakefulness and sleep, little drawers of history slide open. A photograph that traveled inside a pocket, a letter that crossed a continent of worry, a brass button kept for no good reason, except that memory needs something to hold. We will open those drawers one by one, and we will do it in a voice made for night, gentle, unhurried, as if placing a blanket over a story and tucking in the corners. Listen for the soft things, the click of a lantern's handle, the leaf-thin sigh a page makes when unfolded, the river's slow habit of explaining the moon to the shore. We will not hurry. We will not argue. We will walk at the quiet speed of someone carrying a candle through rooms and letting the light choose where to rest. And when the candle leans, as all flames do, we will protect it with a cupped hand. That is how we will travel together. Here is our hook to carry in your palm. A soldier with a photograph pressed in his hand, a father whose name returned home before he did, a letter written to a president in the patient ink of justice, a bridge that hummed under moonlight, a field kitchen where soup salted itself like forgiveness, a door that refused to learn suspicion and stayed willing for years. True stories, carried softly. Chapter 1. Harrisburg Depot, 1861. A station is a throat where towns learn to swallow goodbyes. Harrisburg's depot stands with the modest pride of timbers that have earned their knots. The chalked timetable breathes in even numbers. Pigeons consult the rafters like librarians approving a first draft. It is almost evening, and the light has chosen to behave like honey. Blue coats gather by the third car, kepis tilted, cartridge boxes neat, haversacks holding what the heart insists upon. A folded handkerchief, a date made of ribbon, a letter meant for the next stop and the one after that. Somewhere down the platform a sanitary commission volunteer tucks small kindnesses into large hands. A square of linen for fever and for fear, a wrapped biscuit for the pocket where good news should go. A look that says the quiet part out loud, come back if you can. The station master is thin as a bookmark and twice as patient. He polishes the lantern glass until the flame would see its own face if it had one. When he lifts it, light becomes less an object than a vow. I will keep my small promise as long as I am fed. The metal handle remembers the shape of other fingers and does not complain. Our soldier stands near the middle of the line as if the world had made a place for him and promised not to make a fuss. His shoulders are not the shoulders of statues. They are the shoulders that know what roofs feel like when lifted, what children feel like when swung once more, what flour feels like when the bin is low and the day is long. He wears his height respectfully. Inside his coat, where a pocket has earned its trust, rests a letter he did not write, but can recite from memory the way hands remember stitches. It is a letter written by another man in another state a week before Bull Run, words to a wife that the newspapers would later make into a kind of hymn. He does not need to quote it. It is enough to remember that someone, somewhere, found language large enough to fold around love and duty at the same time, and gentle enough not to bruise either. The locomotive coughs its smoky grammar into the evening. Orders whisper down the cars like wind through corn. Potomac Line, Fredericksburg roads, bridges not yet built crossing rivers that have already rehearsed their arguments. A fifer who has not yet learned the economy of breath plays to bars of The Girl I Left Behind Me and then laughs at himself for forgetting the next two. A corporal balances a tin cup on the step as if practicing steadiness for longer work. The cup watches the lamplight and tries to learn. Goodbyes do not need teachers. They teach themselves, one finger at a time. A woman with a parcel wrapped in brown paper presses it into the future with a firmness that would make bread rise. A boy counts the cars on his fingers and then counts his fingers, as if numbers could be persuaded into mercy. The station master lowers the lantern a fraction and nods in the way men nod when what they mean is "May the road remember you by name." Inside the carriage, wood settles into the labor of carrying. The soldier takes a window seat and allows the glass to turn the town into a slow parade. Lamp, gate, dog, stoop, each bows and then forgets to stand. The platform slides past with the polite indifference of scenery. It cannot know it has just become a story's first sentence. He sets his pack by his boots and places his hat upon it, like a punctuation mark, deciding not to shout. Opposite him, a man unfolds a newspaper and looks not at headlines but at the small news that refuses to be dramatic. A colt born in the next county. A storm that broke the heat without breaking a single pane. A school deciding to add 2 shelves to its library, like a farmer adding an acre to a field. On the back page, an advertisement promises a tonic that cures both sorrow and squeaky hinges. He smiles at the idea that sorrow and hinges might share a recipe. The conductor passes with the authority of brass buttons and clean hands. He clicks the tickets in pairs, as if assigning each traveller a twin for luck. The car begins to move with the tired dignity of things that do not announce their virtues. Outside, trees collect themselves into a blur, and then into themselves again. Fields lie like quilts, stitched by women who understand both pattern and surprise. A river shows up early, rude, and irresistible, and then pretends it was invited. The soldier rests his palm on his pocket, where a different photograph lives, the kind that will not survive a storm, but can outlast an argument. In it, a braid has the self-possession of a coastline. A face remembers sunlight. The corners are soft in a way only hands can teach. He does not look at it now. Some comforts are meant for after lights out, when the car is lit by snores and the night is willing to keep counsel. For an hour, and then another, the car rehearses its lullaby. Iron, wood, iron, wood. Conversation thins into the treble of cups and the bass of boots. Somewhere 2 men begin to argue about a point of scripture and end by sharing the apple they were planning to use as evidence. Somewhere, a boy with a voice not yet introduced to shaving hums 3 notes and abandons the 4th, because he cannot decide whether it should rise or fall. Somewhere, a chaplain writes a letter to a mother he has never met, the paper moving under his pen like a lake under a skater. Night fastens its clasp. The soldier sleeps and does not sleep. He practices both. In that soft corridor between the two, he stands again in a kitchen whose windows understand seasons. A kettle discovers its whistle and announces itself without arrogance. Bread remembers the warmth that changed it from dough into something that forgives. A dog pretends not to know the word come, while walking directly toward it. There is a chair at the head of the table that sits with the patience of an old friend waiting for a joke to return for its coat. He opens the door to the yard, and the night that lives there smells of cut grass and a plan for tomatoes. He wakes feeling he has been home in the only way that counts. Dawn braids itself into the smoke. The car agrees to be morning. Coffee becomes the first subject of the day and performs well. A volunteer with serious eyes and a ribbon that believes in its own color walks the aisle and leaves 2 small squares of linen on 2 large laps, saying, "For fever, for bleeding, for letters, if you've nothing else." She says, "For letters, if you've nothing." as if pens are as real a danger as bullets, which in a certain light is true. The heart can be wounded is true. The heart can be wounded by words it chooses to say. By noon, the train has finished its argument with a hill and is discussing terms with a valley. It stops for water in a town that looks like a child's drawing 3 peaks for roofs. A river sketched like a blue ribbon, 2 birds that are really check marks. The station dog reads the situation and wags diplomacy. The men disembark in careful lines, as if they have been practicing not to break the world when they step on it. The soldier stands a little apart and watches the scoop fill the tender. He has never minded waiting as long as the work knows where it is going. On the platform, a boy sells newspapers and does not understand he is selling history by the sheet. He calls the headlines like a crier at a market, then offers a penny back to anyone who can spell Rappahannock without looking. He loses no pennies. A woman from a porch 3 houses down holds up a basket of peaches and is astonished to discover she has perfectly guessed the number of hands. The train pulls away with the politeness of someone leaving a good conversation at just the right moment. Afternoon leans its elbow on the windows and does not apologize. The soldier writes 3 lines in a small book. Today the road learned my name. The lantern at the station kept its promise. I will return when the road remembers me. He underlines the last sentence twice, not because he doubts it, but because the hand likes to make a shape when the heart has made a vow. Clouds consider thunder and then decide to save it for another county. The car settles for the long, slow paragraph of miles. Someone tells a story about a bridge that has not been built yet, and yet already knows the sound it will make under moonlight. Someone else says that soup in a field kitchen can teach a tired man to say grace without words. The soldier listens and puts both into the pocket where good news belongs, beside the wrapped biscuit from the woman with the ribbon that refused to dim. Evening is a careful pianist. It touches each window once and moves on. The soldier tilts his hat forward, and the world becomes a field seen from under a brim, a neat rectangle that invites the imagination to finish the landscape. He thinks of the letter that travelled across states to a wife in another town and another house. A letter in which courage and love put their arms around each other and did not let go. He does not need the exact words. He needs only the knowledge that words can be that brave. The train breathes. The men sleep in turns. Outside, miles plot themselves into a quilt whose pieces will be named later creek, ridge and ford and orchard, street, when a map and a memory sit down together and discover they have been telling the same story all along. Near midnight, the conductor walks the aisle with his lamp turned low, counting not faces but breaths. He is not a doctor. He is not a priest. He is the keeper of small certainties. That this car holds this many men, that this night will pass. That morning will come with its usual suggestions: wash, eat, stand, step, and carry. He touches a shoulder that dreams too loudly, and the dream, understanding, agrees to speak more softly. By dawn they are close to the river, whose very name sounds like knuckles on a door. The train will leave them within the polite distance that orders prescribe. Feet will learn a different kind of arithmetic. Bridges will be needed. Ropes will become sentences that persuade wood to remember it was once a tree and can, for a little longer, be strong. Someone will whistle 3 notes, and this time decide where the 4th goes. Soup will simmer in a canvas house and teach salt how to forgive a day. A door far away will remain unlocked, because it has chosen hospitality as its craft. But now, for one more moment, let us stay in the train that carries them like a careful cradle. The soldier opens his palm and lets the light see the photograph it has not yet been shown. A face that taught him steadiness, a braid that knows the map of his fingers, a set of eyes that prefer truth told quietly. He returns the picture to the pocket where good news belongs. He folds his hat into the confidence of a man who has learned one farm chore at a time. That usefulness is a kind of prayer. When the train sighs to a halt and the call goes up, he stands. He does not hurry. He has learned that courage has no need for speed. Stepping down, he finds the platform boards as ready as a welcome. Behind him, the station's lantern keeps its own kind of vigil, a small sun that believes in night. Ahead, the road writes its long sentence. He begins to read, word by word, step by patient step. If you are sleepy now, let sleep come. If you are listening, listen as the rails grow quiet behind him and the river begins to speak. There will be other chapters. A photograph found where summer meets sorrow. A letter whose ink outlives its author. A bridge that learns to hum. A kitchen that salts like forgiveness. A door that refuses to learn suspicion. For now, hold the lantern's circle in your palm and let it be enough. Chapter 2. The photograph that found its way home, Gettysburg, 1863. Afternoon leaned heavy on the hills, and July made the grass glitter as if trying to distract the eye from what men were teaching the earth. The town of Gettysburg had always been a tidy conversation between orchards and streets, fences and porches, barns that knew the names of seasons. But on the first day of the battle, the map's handwriting changed. Fields began to speak in urgent tones. The ridge and the cup of town between ridges learned a new, unchosen grammar. When the noise slowed, never quite stopping, only catching its breath, neighbors stepped out from cellars and parlors, the way cautious readers turn a page they fear will be the last. Some came with buckets, some with bandages, some with nothing but hands that could hold another hand. In a small tangle of grass, at the edge of town, where summer had laid itself down as if for a nap, they found him, a Union sergeant, his uniform dusty with the geography he had traveled through and the hour that had taken him. There were no papers in his pockets to introduce him, no tag stitched to say from where, only a photograph in his hand pressed there. Not tucked away 3 children arranged in the careful stillness a camera asks for. 2 boys, 1 girl, and their expressions solemn with the seriousness children reserve for love. The finder paused the way a heart pauses when it recognizes something it has never seen. Not a letter, not a ledger, but faces, small, fierce, in their quiet, looking out of the war and into a room where someone would one day say their names out loud again. The picture was lifted gently and carried back into town, cupped like a small bird. People gathered and did what people do when words are fragile. They spoke softly, and then they found what the moment required: ink, paper, and a road between sorrow and answer. In the days that followed, the photograph traveled farther than some regiments marched. A doctor from Philadelphia copied it, and newspapers printed descriptions that moved like lanterns hand to hand. The image went out into parlors and kitchens, into post offices and church vestibules, into places where grief had taken a chair and would not leave, into homes where the kettles sang anyway because kettles are faithful and do not believe in despair. The caption did not shout. It asked a question. Who knows these children? A mother in New York for Linda did. The space between seeing and knowing closed like 2 palms, finally meeting. She recognized the set of a collar that never lay flat, the way a ribbon bowed to the will of hair that preferred its own mind, the angle at which one son always tipped his chin when the world was trying to be taller than him. She said their names the way names should be said: Frank, Frederick, Alice, and in that saying she also spoke aloud the father's name that the battlefield had tried to keep. Amos, Humiston, a man whose hand had held their faces as if the picture itself were a door he could carry with him, one that opened to the right house every time. It is a strange mathematics to explain, but true all the same. A photograph can build rooms. Donations raised through that image helped create a home in Gettysburg for children who had been set adrift by the war. People called it the Soldier's Orphan Homestead. Beds were made, lessons were taught. Windows learned to usher in mornings that did not arrive with alarms. Gardens were turned, and peas learned to climb twine with the patience of people who already know where they are going. The house acquired the gentle bossiness of places that understand their purpose. In the dining hall, wooden bowls recorded years of meals by the gloss's hands leave when gratitude is quietly vigorous. Walk with me a moment through that house. The hallway keeps voices like a seashell keeps the sea. On a wall, the photograph of 3 children has a frame that does not ask for attention. It knows that the faces inside do enough work. A teacher's desk has nicks in its edge from pencils testing their sharpness, and from the daily negotiation between ambition and arithmetic. In the upstairs dormitory, quilts are not fancy, but they are precise. They know the feeling of shoulders and the way feet hunt for coolness in summer. A small trunk sits at the end of one bed. Inside, a button has been saved that belonged to a father's coat, and under the button a slip of paper with a handwriting that tried very hard and succeeded often. The town learned new habits because of that photograph. 2 streets over, a baker who had made bread for soldiers and funerals both, decided that every Saturday 1 tray would be for the orphan house, no coin taken, only a promise. When you grow and bake, you will give away the first loaf now and then, so a child does not meet a morning with an empty plate. At the post office, a clerk put aside the best twine for parcels addressed to widows and carried them to the far edge of town himself, because some deliveries should not be trusted to chance. A seamstress who worked by the window with the best light moved her chair so that on Tuesdays it faced the street, and she mended for free the uniforms of those still marching and the elbows of those growing too fast at the orphanage. The picture had taught people not just what to feel, but what to do, and in the house where the recognition took hold in New York, miles away, Felinda steered her days between absence and duty like a careful ferryman in a busy harbor. She had the letter from Gettysburg that said what needed saying and no more. She had the photograph that she had once watched a photographer coax her children to sit still for, and now it had become a kind of passport, stamped by sorrow and returned with use. She placed it on the mantel not as a shrine, but as a reminder that paper, like memory, must be handled but not hidden. There were nights when she moved it an inch to the left and then back to the right, as if looking for the best wind for a small boat. She spoke to it only in the language mothers use when they wish to speak and not frighten hum. Sigh, the soft inventory of a day's small victories, the news of a loose tooth and a mended hem. The story did not become legend because legends prefer to forget the price of their telling. It became record, in ledgers and minutes, in letters filed and refiled, in photographs catalogued and reprinted so that the faces do not fade merely because the ink did. People kept receipts of donations. The orphan house kept lists of names and who learned to read which book in which month. Newspapers kept the language that introduced the children to a nation of strangers who learned how to care for them without ever seeing them except on paper. The war had made names into a currency. This story gave them back their faces. If we step out to the field again in the hush that sometimes comes between wind and bird, we can imagine the moment that picture left one hand and entered another. A shadow moved across the grass that wasn't a cloud, just a person learning how to be careful with a sorrow not their own. The frame lifted. The image caught the light and held it the way truth does when it has waited long enough. The air took a breath it did not know it had been holding. In town, a bell did not ring. The restraint was a kind of prayer. The years did what years do. They stacked themselves neatly and sometimes crooked, and they taught everyone involved how to carry a photograph's weight properly between the ribs, where breath and memory shake hands. Children at the orphan homestead grew and took their leave like shoes do, softly, to lives where their own children would later be asked. In school or on porches, is it true? Were you one of them? And they would answer yes or no or a long story. But however they answered, the photograph kept working, as photographs do, even when the room is empty. The sergeant on the grass did not come home, not in the way people usually mean, but with the old arithmetic of mercy, every bed made under the roof, built with the help of his photograph, every bowl filled in that dining hall, every lesson sounding out the first brave syllables of a child's name. These were returns of a different kind. The world has more than one door through which a man can walk back. Sometimes it is not a man at all, but the consequence of his tenderness. And if you want another small thing to keep with you as sleep comes closer, picture a school day on that property long after the first telling of the story. A boy with new boots stands and reads aloud from a primer. He stumbles on a word and the room leans forward, not to catch him, but to help the word find its footing. He continues. He finishes. He sits down, and the sound that fills the room is not applause, but the quiet relief of being understood. On the wall, the photograph of 3 children watches without blinking, as if to say, continue. The bell at the door will ring for dinner soon. The garden will need watering. Somewhere the town band will rehearse a slow march that wants to be a lullaby. The picture has no voice, but it has given one to this room. Night returns to Gettysburg the way it does to every town, without asking permission and without making enemies. The hill keeps its slope, the cemetery keeps its stone grammar, the streets keep their sensible angles, and in a house that learned to translate grief into shelter, the lamps lower themselves and the stairs remember every footfall. The photograph rests in a frame on a wall that has learned to hold tenderness the way wood holds light. And if a breeze lifts the curtain at the right moment, it looks like the picture is about to speak. Sleep, if you wish, or listen a while longer. There will be more. A letter to a president written in the ink of justice. A bridge that hummed in moonlight. A kitchen where soup salted like forgiveness. A door that chose welcome as its only policy. But for now, let the photograph be enough, a small paper harbour where a name, once lost among fields and orders, moors itself again with the quietest of ropes. Chapter 3. Ink for Equal Measure, the 54th Massachusetts, 1863-1864. Night in camp behaves like a careful librarian, shelving noise by the handful until only the useful sounds remain. A kettle settling, canvas answering rain with a soft arithmetic, boots exhaling the day's miles. Beneath the lantern's warm grammar, a table that has known salt and maps becomes a desk. The quill waits. Paper lies with a kind of practiced humility, as if it understands its duty is to carry a voice where feet cannot go. James Henry Gooding, whaleman once. Soldier now sits with his back straight and his breath even, the way you do when a sentence must cross a great distance and arrive standing. His uniform is the blue of oceans he has already argued with and won. His hands steady the page, not to keep it from moving, but to keep the world from doing so, for as long as it takes to write what needs saying. Around him, the 54th Massachusetts is bedding down. that regiment of promise and proof, men who have already placed their courage where the country could see it, and who must now persuade that same country to measure them in equal coin. He dips the pen. Ink collects, like truth, deciding to be legible. He begins, "Sir, no thunder in the greeting, only the clean edge of respect. Then the plain work of justice. We enlisted as soldiers of the United States, not as contrabands, not as laborers, not as shadows useful until finished with. We drill, we march, and we fight. Pay us as you pay white men who do the same." The words do not lean on anger, they do not need to. They stand on the even floorboards of fact. They carry the quiet dignity of a man who has hauled rope in storms and learned to trust knots more than adjectives. Outside the tent, the wind fingers the guy lines and makes a harp of them. Somewhere a night bird opens its small door of sound. In the distance, a river practices holding the moon steady, the way a hand holds a level when a beam needs to be true. Gooding writes on, his lines tidy as ship's log entries, the kind that do not exaggerate the sea. There is steadiness in his script, a sailor's economy. No extra words, no wasted wake. He signs the letter not as a supplicant, but as a citizen. Names the regiment that has already taught the Republic something about itself. Folds the paper with a care that makes creases look like decisions. One of his friends brings the lamp closer, not to hurry the writing, but to bless it. Men of the 54th come and go, each with a small ritual of encouragement, an elbow briefly on his shoulder, a nod that means, "Finish this," a quiet joke to keep the ink from drying too quickly with importance. They do not crowd, they do not advise. They know when a man is building a bridge whose planks only his hand can lay. In the morning, the letter begins its long service, from camp to courier to desk to desk to desk, until a clerk places it where it was aimed. Paper is a patient traveler. Along the way, the envelope gathers the fingerprints of people who do not interfere, only help the day choose its better self. Each touch leaves a trace that no ledger will record, but that the world will spend slowly over years, like spare coins saved for bread. When the letter reaches its destination, it joins others on a table that has learned the weight of pleas and orders, sorrow and policy, the grand and the granular. The room itself is a kind of hinge. One side holds the old shape of things, the other waits. The letter speaks in lines that do not raise their voice. It is heard because it brought its own calm. There is a city's worth of context at its shoulders. Fort Wagner not long behind, where the 54th stepped onto a narrow finger of land and showed a nation what its own words look like when they are kept. Months of drill and discipline, quarters inspected and rifles cleaned, boots repaired by men who have known other work and will know more again when peace decides to be practical. There is also the arithmetic that insists on being counted. White soldiers at $13 a month, black soldiers at 10, with clothing deductions that subtract dignity alongside coin. The letter lays the numbers on the table like tools. Then it asks the only question that matters. Is the work not the same? Back in camp, days knead into weeks. Paydays arrive and do not. Rations continue, as rations do, tasting like necessity salted with intention. The men of the 54th keep their posture. They drill, march, stand. They carry the country's contradictions and do not slouch under them. Gooding writes home when he can, his letters threaded with the intelligence of a man who notices weather, the angle of a captain's hat, the way night smells before rain. He is not a monument. He is a person with a pen and a place to be. That is the point. Autumn tilts. The map redraws itself in small acts of stubbornness and grace. Somewhere a grandmother folds a shawl and says a name and does not cry. Somewhere a child counts the buttons on a uniform left hanging, because there is comfort in even numbers. Somewhere a preacher discovers that a prayer for justice sounds clearer when it is whispered. The letter does its work. It enters rooms. It changes the air. People argue in good faith. Others argue otherwise. Paper accumulates in little drifts that office boys learn to hop over without looking down. The nation, guilty and luminous, begins to admit what it owes. The promise of equal pay moves from rumor to law the way dawn advances along a fence. Quietly, post by post, it will be made retroactive in time, and then more fully so, as if the statute itself learned to walk more upright with practice. But the letter's author will not see all of that. February moves him south, toward honesty, where pines stand like listeners and sand looks innocent and is not. Battle is a hurry that steals breath and gives back resolve. In that wedge of Florida light, Gooding's path bends into capture. He begins another journey, the kind where each mile takes away something you would not have given willingly. The train that bears him is indifferent. The road is a long, hollow bone. He arrives at a place that has learned to forget kindness as a way to keep operating. Andersonville Camp Sumter does not believe in gentle. The sun has authority there. Thirst runs the meetings. Men collect shade the way a miser collects coins. Even their jokes are thin. Laughter is a dry creek. Gooding, who has known decks that heaved and winds that argued, learns the exact geometry of the deadline, that imaginary line with real bullets behind it. He learns to make a cup of his hands and drink slowly. He learns new uses for old cloth, new names for old pains. He learns which scraps of sky are friendlier than others. He does not become smaller inside his body. He becomes more himself. The way a line boiled down becomes stronger on the tongue. There is a clerk in that camp, Dorrance Atwater, whose talent is accuracy, and whose courage is to copy a list he is not meant to keep. Numbers march down the page with funereal patience. Names step beside them like faithful hounds. The pencil wears to a stub. Atwater sharpens it with a knife that remembers better days and keeps at it. The ledger grows. It grows the way weeds do in a garden left alone 1 week too many. When the war fails to end politely, he smuggles the list out under his shirt like a small, defiant sun. Beyond that barbed horizon, Clara Barton, who has taught lamps to follow her, will later carry those names back into the world, will stand in heat and mud and stubborn sorrow to plant markers where breath once rose and fell. She will use the list like a compass. She will trace the vanished until they answer. She will say to a country still counting the cost of every decision, here and here and here. She will give families the mercy of a place to point their grief. Gooding's name is among them, July 19th, 1864, not chiseled yet, only written, then typed, then printed, then finally carved by men with steady hands and by time, which is both mason and thief. He does not return to Massachusetts in the ordinary way. He returns in the pay equalization that follows. In the lesson school children learn when they read his letter and find themselves straighter in their chairs. In the way a soldier's widow pronounces the word ode, with both bitterness and pride, and finds they can live together in one mouth. Imagine, on a summer evening years later, a small town hall where children are making a strange, valiant sound with rented cornets. The windows are open. The moths audition for parts they will not get. On a table at the back, a teacher has placed a copy of Gooding's letter beneath glass. People drift by, read a line or two, and move on. No one claps. No one needs to. The letter is doing its work without asking for applause, the way a lighthouse does not ask the sea to be grateful. Or imagine a kitchen, any kitchen, where a boy with ink on his fingers asks his mother what equal pay means. She answers with the price of flour and the price of boots, and how long it takes a candle to finish a room. She tells him about men who ask the country to honor its own signature. She tells him about a pen that found a path to power because it did not travel alone. It went with a regiment behind it, a nation ahead of it, and a promise beneath it. The boy nods, the way children nod when a thing is both larger than them and exactly their size. Back in that camp at night, before the capture, before Florida's sand rearranged his fate, Gooding finishes his letter and blows gently on the ink. The breath he gives it becomes the breath it will use to speak in rooms he will never see. He folds the paper, he presses the crease, as if that act could keep the world from fraying where it most wants to. He places the letter in its envelope with the moral precision of a man who knows a ledger must balance somewhere, even if not here. The lantern gutters, then decides to continue. Outside, a dog settles and dreams of old streets. A sentinel shifts his weight and finds the pose he can keep. The river at the edge of camp rehearses the sound it will make when history leans close to listen. A shiver, a hush, and the consonants of moonlight. Sleep comes in rationed helpings. He takes his and is grateful. We could end the chapter at a grave, or at a desk, or at a parade where a statute corrects a number with retroactive ink. But bedtime prefers a gentler closing. So hold this instead. The image of a hand, steady over paper, of a line that asks as if it were telling, of a country that, when it manages to hear, sometimes answers. Somewhere, miles away and years forward, a payroll clerk adds figures and does not subtract a dignity that has already been earned. Somewhere, a schoolbook prints his letter and a child underlines a sentence because the heart prefers to keep certain phrases in reach. Somewhere, a museum drawer receives a photocopy and the felt beneath it learns the weight of a small, righteous document. And somewhere in the slow library of night, a lantern glows on a desk, a pen rests, and a page waits for another voice with another necessary request, confident now that paper knows how to carry it all the way home. Chapter 4. The River Made of Nails, Fredericksburg, December 1862. Before dawn, the Rappahannock keeps its voice low, as if the river has promised the town one last hour of dreaming. Along the bank, frost stitches thin white seams on canvas and coat sleeves. Men walk like careful punctuation, boots choosing their commas and periods. They have brought with them a road that floats, a road made of planks and pins, balks and lashings, a vocabulary of wood and iron that will teach water to carry weight. Our unknown soldier tonight is not a banner-bearer or a drummer boy. He is a maker, a pontooner, one of those patient engineers whose hands convince timber to remember being forest, rope to remember being vine, nails to remember the shape of faith. He wears no bright mark for a painter to highlight later. He wears the work, a hammer's glaze on his palms, the soft bruises that balks leave like shy signatures, the habit of looking at current, the way a mason studies wind before a brick is set. Orders have been late, then hurried. The way weather sometimes is when it changes its mind twice. Rafts of pontoon boats, hollow-bellied, canvas-faced, have come grinding up the road, pulled by mule and men with shoulders that will sleep deeply when this is finished. Far across the open reach of river, the town sits in its winter clothes. Roofs neat as folded shirts, church spires holding up the sky like patient fingers. Between the engineers and that town is water wide enough to make shouting foolish and bullets meaningful. Let the river have a bridge. Someone says, not for poetry, but for breakfast. and orders and getting on with the day. They begin, frames laid like the bones of a sentence, stringers slid across, a rib cage rising out of the cold, pins as long as a man's forearm driven through plank and plank and plank with mallets that speak in measured thuds, lashings pulled to the pitch a violin might envy. Each blow says hold, each knot says stay. The river, at first, accepts this with the tolerant curiosity of a host watching guests rearrange the furniture. Then, from the town's far windows and doorways, another kind of punctuation arrives, sharp, insistent, italic. Shots find water and write brief, startling commas across the surface. Others look for wood and leave splinters to lift like dust in the cold. Men on the far bank Mississippians, who have learned how to fold themselves into door frames and eaves, are not eager to let the bridge write its sentence. The engineers keep at it, because that is what their hands have agreed to do. Our pontooner, bent at the waist, feels the plank he is kneeling on translate each strike into the grammar of his bones. He hears the bullets, the way rain hears, hail annoyance, then respect. He does not look up at the town. He looks down at the lashing and tests with his knuckles the music of it higher, tighter. Now it will not betray him. A comrade passes the trestle shoe, the iron that decides whether a leg will land messily or like a gentleman, and he fits it without ceremony. Another shoves the balk into the saddle wood meeting wood with a soft promise. The river lifts and lowers, quarrels and relents, the way any old thing does when asked to share. Pins, someone says, as if summoning courage by its hardware. The sacks are ready iron cold as regret. He takes one, positions it over the whole board through balk and chess, and drives, the mallet's face dense with love. The pin slides, teeth gritting, then agrees. Another, and another. The road begins to exist, one decision at a time. Fire from the town tightens, braids itself into patterns the ear begins to recognize. There is a percussion to urban war that the countryside does not teach. Window ledges become instruments. Shutters become metronomes. The engineers do not answer. They cannot. The bridge answers for them. Longer, stronger, nearer. Behind, batteries prepare their own arguments. Great round syllables lofted toward brick and slate, persuading or punishing as artillery always believes it is doing. Smoke walks across the water and makes everyone a little older. Boat teams, a lieutenant murmurs, and men climb into the waiting pontoons with the deliberateness of sleepwalkers who trust the room to have no new chairs. Oars bite. Water takes the insult and does not spit it out. Commas of dark boat shape move toward town under a page of pale morning, each hole low, quiet, trying not to attract adjectives. Sharpshooters in the houses aim for language rather than lumber now, and the oarsmen duck and rise as if practicing some strange devotion down to the gunwale, up to breath and stroke, forward because the day refuses to be otherwise. Our pontooner is not among the first to ferry across. His hands have a contract with the pinned planks here, but he watches the boats and feels the bridge lean its attention the way a father watches a child step into a room where names are being spoken. The first boats touch the far shore. Bluecoats spill into alleys and doorways, into stairwells and gardens. The quiet, terrible etiquette of house to house begins. On the bridge, work continues, because work is what allows the other verbs to happen. Hold, cross, reinforce, return. There is a moment engineers pray for and never name when the structure stops being a project and starts being a place. It comes beneath him like a cat deciding your lap is trustworthy. A shift, a settling, a yes. He feels it in the arches of his feet, the way pressure redistributes itself when a promise is finally shared by enough pieces. He lifts his head, not in triumph, not in pride, only in the brief relief a shoulder knows when someone else arrives to take the other end of the beam. Men begin to cross, first by twos, then by squads, then by the measured load an officer's caution will permit. The bridge learns feet and begins to love them. It hums low, wood and iron deciding together how to carry. A music that sounds to some like the bowing of a great cello under a careful hand. Our pontooner steps aside so a stretcher may pass, canvas held as if a hammock had agreed to spend the day doing difficult things. On that stretcher, a face, too pale, too young, watches the sky with the astonishment of someone who has never been so interested in clouds before. The river reflects all this without comment. Water's job is not to interpret. Midday opens its throat and lets sound through. From the near bank, new sections of bridge are urged outward, the line lengthening toward the first streets. From the far bank, houses complain under barrage, plaster sighing into stairwells, brick chips learning the brief power of flight. The engineers, sweat cooling, check lashings again with hands that have learned to distrust both pride and despair. A pin that walked must be walked back. A balk that wandered must be coaxed home. The bridge is a parish. Every plank is parishioner and priest in turn. He eats because someone puts bread into his hand and tells him to. It tastes of flour and the dust of nail buckets. He drinks because a canteen insists. The suspended road jolts under him like a horse that does not love the bayonet glint. He lays his palm on the railwood's pulse, meeting his, and tells it, without words, that it is doing well. A younger man, the sort who has yet to learn the virtue of knees, asks how he knows to tie the lashings to that pitch. He answers by plucking the rope. Hear that. If it sings, it's right. If it only talks, it will fail you. The younger man nods, as if he will one day teach this to someone smaller still. When the sun goes long, crossing becomes ritual. Files of blue pass, rifles held with the reverence a choir gives to hymnals. The bridge flexes like a good back, not brittle, not arrogant, and simply willing. On the far side, street fighting slows. Messages return with the look of clothes washed too often, faded, thinner, still doing their duty. There is to be more crossing, more bridges, multiple spans along the town's front, because rivers prefer plural solutions. The engineers, as usual, will leave their signatures underfoot where no ceremony will tread. Evening climbs into the winter trees. Smoke plays at being fog, and fog wins. The river is a belt of steel loosed one notch. Some of the engineers, those not assigned to night watch, are told to rest. Rest, to them, means walking the length of the bridge, as if it were a child, asleep, listening for the catch in breath, the dream that might become a cry. Our pontooner does this, mallet tucked in his belt, like a lullaby with weight to it. Here a lashing gets half a turn more. There a pin is kissed home with the gentlest reprimand wood understands. He remembers, suddenly and with surprise, a kitchen far from here where a girl with braids had once tried to whistle and succeeded only in making the teapot jealous. He remembers a chair and the precise angle at which it receives a body after a day spent doing honest things. He remembers a door that never learned to be suspicious. The bridge beneath him receives these thoughts without jealousy. It knows that it, too, is a kind of home for as long as it must be roofless, certainly, but hospitable in a way roads rarely are. At midnight, a flow of timber coming down from upstream branches, caught around a broken beam in a bouquet assembled by accidents, drifts toward the span like a guest who has read the wrong time on a card. He sees it in the grey and moves with the speed of men who repair first and consider later. Hook, rope, curses less profane than affectionate. The teamwork of hands that have eaten together for a week of hard days, the debris is steered around the pilings without anything more than a scrape and a story to be told on some future bench. He logs it in his head, in the same place he keeps measurements and reasons. The bridge endures, grateful and secretive. By morning, frost again, and the plank tops are careful with boots that forget. The town looks different in first light. Edges softened by smoke's memory, church steeples embarrassed by what they have seen. The river shares some of that shyness. Our pontooner unties and reties, a lashing with the tenderness of a seamstress fixing a hem for a wedding. He checks the shoes where trestles meet ice-scoured cobble, listens for the crack he will not allow, presses a palm to the rail one more time, as if taking its temperature before letting more life cross over. He will not be named in any correspondence column. He will not be painted into any general's portrait, standing heroic in a corner like a well-dressed fact. When the town is eventually remembered, it will be for suffering and strategy, for houses and heights. The bridge will live in footnotes, plans filed in neat drawers, diagrams with ink that never once shivered, but those who crossed will never forget this music. The hum of box sharing weight, the quieting of nails once they have been persuaded, the river's long, even breath below, forgiving not what happened around it, but the crossing itself a permission granted, a patience held. Stand with him for the last time at the span center. Men pass. A stretcher hesitates and then finds the exact beat. The bridge hums agreement and carries. The pontooner closes his eyes and can tell, by sound alone, whether the next squad is 4 paces off cadence or right on it. He does not correct them. The bridge has learned to translate. By week's end, new timbers will bruise, new lashings will be sung to pitch, and new orders will decide which road deserves to exist for a day and which must remain hypothetical. He will move on, as bridges demand, build, hold, unbuild, carry, let go. And if he does not return, if somewhere down a different river, a different span, asks too much of his lungs, then this plank, this pin, this lashing will still remember his hands. Wood is loyal, iron is faithful in its way. Rope, when treated kindly, keeps secrets and promises with equal skill. If you need a picture to accompany sleep, let it be this: a road laid upon water, humming under moonlight, a man with a mallet checking the pitch of a knot as if tuning a borrowed violin, a river that, for one long winter day, agreed to be a paragraph others could walk across. Somewhere, far behind the ridge, a door remains unlocked. Somewhere, nearer than we think, soup is being salted as forgiveness. Somewhere ahead, the next river rehearses its opposition and will, when the time comes, learn to say yes long enough for feet to pass. The bridge holds. The town breathes. The engineers, unknown, uncarved, roll their shoulders and look downstream to the bend where the current writes its cursive. Dawn puts a hand on the span and finds it warm. The day crosses. We follow. Chapter 5. The kitchen that salted like forgiveness. The U.S. Sanitary Commission. Rain arrived the way a careful ant enters a nursery, 2 fingers to her lips, the other hand already folding back the noise. It stitched itself across the canvas of the field hospital, and the canvas accepted the embroidery without protest. Inside, a long stove drew a steady breath. Kettles spoke in comfortable syllables. Knives tapped out a polite percussion on boards that had learned the width of onions. The day had made a mess of itself out there beyond the guy ropes. In here, the U.S. Sanitary Commission was busy with the quiet engineering of mercy. Heat, water, salt, patience, and the kind of hands that know how to turn hunger into something gentler than want. They called this the kitchen, but really it was a soft-bellied ship anchored on mud. Crates of desiccated vegetables, compressed gardens with their water folded inward like secret notes, waited to be woken. Barrels of coffee beans told the air that the night would end better than it began. Sacks of rice leaned into one another like cousins at a funeral. A crate of lemons, bright, improbable suns, made the tent look for a moment like a summer market in a town that had not yet learned to whisper. Someone had stitched names into a quilt sent from far away. Nell, Ada, Temperance, Lou, letters that would outlast the thread if they had to. Volunteers moved in a circle the way constellations do when they are well behaved. A merchant's daughter from Cincinnati stood elbow to elbow with a milliner from Albany and a farmer's wife whose hands could judge a loaf's doneness by sound alone. On their sleeves, small pinned badges winked lamplight tokens not of rank but of belonging. Tiny moons borrowing shine from the greater, steadier light of the task. They ladled, stirred, rinsed, and boiled coffee in black iron that had learned to speak all dialects of fatigue. They tied on aprons that remembered flour and then forgot it again under steam. They met every request the day made with a wooden spoon and a better idea. Hardtack arrived in boxers like arguments. Square, pale, reliable, cruel. It had more nicknames than a favoured child: sheet iron, tooth dullers, jawbreakers, and it earned them all. But the kitchen had a treaty with stubborn things. Hardtack was broken with the blunt, loving insistence of someone convincing a shy horse to take the bit. It was soaked in coffee, the bitter wash forgiving its sins. It was fried in a little pork grease until it almost remembered joy. While the tin cups filled, men at the flap told stories about weevils, skippers, the patient pests that sometimes shipped with the biscuit. The volunteers smiled thinly and stirred a whisker longer. You could not banish every indignity a ration could carry, but you could drown a few of them in a good, boiling idea. At a side table, a basket of lint, soft as the first thinking of snow, waited in a drift the colour of old weddings. It had been rolled from the unravelling of sheets in parlours where women whose names we rarely keep turned fabric into tenderness. There was bandage cloth with selvages hemmed by hand, pillowcases with initials stitched into the edge, drawers and socks as practical as a sermon that knows which pew it needs to visit. Glass jars of pickles and horseradish stood at attention beside vinegar like two doctors that didn't mind sharing a coat. Crates labelled sanitary commission stood open-mouthed, ready to confess all the good they had smuggled past distance. Soap, brushes, combs, towels, a packet of needles, a housewife kit for mending, a tiny Bible, a tin of salve with instructions in small, hopeful print. A clerk from the commission's spectacles fogged by usefulness stood beneath a lantern, taking notes in a ledger that would one day remind a country how order sounds when it whispers. Camp inspected. Sinks moved downhill. Water boiled, not begged. Latrines covered. Straw changed. Flies argued with and defeated by screens. He wrote the names of units visited, recorded the arrival of hospital transports, logged the number of blankets issued, circled the line where someone had finally found fresh milk in the next county. There was a sermon in the inventory, one that used no pulpit. Clean is kind, air is medicine. Enough is salvation by other means. Mid-morning, the rain knit itself into a finer cloth, and the kettle declared a holiday for steam. A line formed that was not a parade and not a plea, just the human geometry of bowls and mouths. Men came in with shoulders that had learned to keep their own counsel. They held their tinware like instruments, waiting to be tuned. Each bowl received the Sanitary Commission's mercy in the same measure: vegetable stew coaxed from dry gardens, rice that had remembered water, a piece of hardtack civilized by coffee, and a dash of pepper from a jar that made the whole tent sneeze its laughter into its sleeves. No one announced this as charity. It was logistics with a conscience, discipline in the service of comfort, policy rewritten in ladles. At the work table, a boy barely old enough to claim a beard cracked pepper with a seriousness that Western philosophers might have envied. He had grown up in a town where the Commission had held a sanitary fair, booths like bright prayers, quilts auctioned with stories about who had stitched which square, a ship carved from a peach pit, a glass jar of cherries that kept their red as if war didn't exist. He remembered music and women in dresses the color of days when recipes behaved. He remembered his mother trading a basket of apples for a book of camp cooking receipts, sponsored by people who believed that soup could turn fear into something edible. That memory warmed his hands as much as the stove did now. Near the flap, a U.S. Christian Commission chaplain neighbor to the sanitary, not its rival, set out coffee tins and testaments that fit a breast pocket without stabbing. He knew the difference between a sermon and a sentence. Mostly he poured coffee and let the steam do the ministering. Once or twice he read a letter for a man whose hands shook and wrote a reply that made the truth bearable without teaching it to lie. The sanitary and the Christian understood the border between their duties and maintained it with a handshake, a shared sack of beans, and the exchange of a joke that wouldn't make it into any history. Toward noon, the canvas brightened, as if the sun had pressed a cheek to it and found the day acceptable after all. The kettle's lid danced its little dance. The big spoon traced a figure 8 through onions sweated to sweetness. Salt pork surrendered itself in careful coins to a pan already acquainted with the idea of generosity. A volunteer named Anna held up a lemon and grinned as if she had discovered a new star. She cut it into obedient moons and slid them into a pot where rice and barley were rehearsing their duet. Vitamin C would not be named here. It had not yet put on its letters and gone to a university. But scurvy had learned to fear citrus, and so the soup smiled a little brighter. When the line reached quiet, the kitchen did not rest. It boiled water for cups that needed doing. It scrubbed boards until they showed up to themselves again. It stacked bowls in high, tender towers that would be required again before sunset. It wrote labels for boxes going out to another camp downstream, for fevers, for feet, for spirits, for letters that have nowhere else to go. Volunteers rolled bandages while the talk slid between recipes and maps, refusing to grant either the final word. A young surgeon, his face the tired precision of a compass, came to the flap and asked, gently, for beef tea. He received it the way a man accepts a verdict he had hoped for but did not expect. In a corner of the tent, where canvas met earth as if two strangers had agreed to be cousins, a crate sat open with its paper packing saved the way thrifty hearts save every envelope string. Inside, canned fruits that had traveled from a state someone in the tent might never see. Peaches, pears, round vowels in a day full of edges. The labels had illustrations so cheerful they embarrassed the rain. The clerk wrote a note, one can reserved for after midnight, because morale sometimes required a moon you could spoon. Men came for seconds, or for news, or just to stand near the stove, as if warmth were a language they had almost forgotten and were ready to study again. One set his cup down and took a turn at the dishpan without being asked. Another, whose hands shook like a telegraph that could not decide which station it belonged to, dried bowls and stacked them with a competence that made the tent feel a shade bigger. A third handed a volunteer a letter and asked her, with the shy fierceness of a man determined not to cry, to make sure it found the road. She slid it into a pouch, stitched with a town's name she had never visited, and said, simply, yes, afternoon practiced being evening. The commission's inspectors returned from the perimeter with notes on a latrine moved half a dozen yards, just enough to keep flies from believing they ran things. They logged tents spaced wider, drainage encouraged by a few smart cuts, cooks shown the mercy of a shovel and a piece of board to stand on. Sick call emptied more quickly because someone found the right line to color patients into order. None of it sounded like heroism to those who preferred brass and drums. All of it lengthened lives in a quiet syllable-by-syllable way that brass will never learn to conjugate. At dusk, an ambulance train creaked into place, mules flicking their ears at abstractions, and the kitchen sent broth in covered pails down the row like offerings. A boy too young for the lines on his face took a spoonful and looked astonished, as if shocked that the world had remembered him in this one practical way. He whispered thank you not to anyone in particular, perhaps to the steam, perhaps to the day for not being greedy all the way to its end. There were small failures, too, confessed and corrected without drama. A barrel of flour that had travelled with leaks and learned to clump. A sack of beans that had picked up a taste of the wagon and needed more rinsing than was decent. A kettle that scorched because 2 favors and 3 names arrived at the same time at the cook's ear. The tent addressed these the way a village addresses a drunk uncle, firmly, kindly, with a mop and a promise to do better tomorrow. Night, at last, laid the cool side of its hand over the camp. Stars came out, neat as stitches. The tent's lanterns were turned down one by one, not as a dismissal, but as a blessing. The kitchen put itself to bed. Fire banked, knives asleep in a folded towel, boards leaned to dry. Aprons hung like tired flags at peace with their stains. Outside, the rain done with its lesson left, the guy lines thrumming a minor chord the wind could sing too. Before the volunteers stepped away, they each did the small act they had adopted without being told. One straightened the crate labels, making for coffee lineup exactly with 4T, as if geometry could make generosity more accurate. One counted the spoons because loss has a way of travelling in cutlery and must be politely refused. One wrote a line in the ledger about the boy who shook but dried bowls while not a name, not a number, just a witness. One tucked a lemon into a pocket for a man who swore he hated lemons and would later eat it like candy. And one, Anna, paused with her palm on the warm iron of the stove and said, very quietly and to no person at all, hold. The stove held, the night held, the camp exhaled. If you are awake still, carry to your pillow this small inventory the Sanitary Commission's alphabet turned into a lullaby. A is for aprons, washed, thin but clean. B is for broth that teaches water how to help. C is for coffee that remembers dawn before dawn does. D is for desiccated vegetables, gardens folded small. E is for envelopes addressed by hands that shake. F is for fairs where goodness learned to make itself festive. G is for gauze, soft as the thought of snow. H is for hardtack, argued into kindness. I is for inspection, the courtesy of order. J is for jars of peaches, summer kept for rationed nights. K is for kettles, their tin throats humming. L is for lemons, suns you can slice. M is for milk, rare and astonishing. N is for needles, finding a hem in a hurry. O is for onions, patience that melts. P is for pickles, sharp little sermons. Q is for quilts, squares of promise. R is for rice, small and faithful. S is for soap, the first medicine. T T is for towels, one more chance at dignity. U is for utensils, counted and kept. V is for vinegar, discipline in a bottle. W is for water, boiled into trust. X can be the crossed ladles waiting on hooks. Y is for yeast, on the rare days bread rises in a war. Z is for the few hours of ZZZZ that broth buys you when it warms you past hunger. Somewhere beyond the tent, a bridge hums under late boots. Somewhere a door in a distant town refuses to learn suspicion. Somewhere a ledger waits by lamplight to receive another name rescued from heat and dust. But here, in the kitchen that's salted like forgiveness, the night learns to be kind by watching people who already are. And if those people do not return, if their names remain only in the margins of ledgers and in the long memory of spoons and kettles, the warmth they made will go on working a steady, invisible arithmetic that turns fear invisible, and loneliness into a table where someone sits with steam fades, and the cup is empty, and bon the cow when it is not once, and it once, it nonce, once, when what I want, so to where I where, when, and if, or what I what to that Chapter 6. The ledger that brought them home, Andersonville and the names. Morning at Andersonville did not so much arrive as rearrange the light. It unbuttoned the night by one patient button and let the day step in without ceremony. The air held the taste of pine and heat and dust that remembered every foot that had ever troubled it. A few birds, untroubled by human grammar, practiced their bright, oblivious script along the stockade's crown. Inside, men woke from small sleep the way a violin wakes, by touch, by habit, by a note that hopes to be followed by another. The place had a rule that pretended to be a line. It ran inside the wall like a ribbon that had learned obedience. A narrow belt of earth called the deadline no marker but a rough fence, and the knowledge that beyond it the world did not forgive. It was not loudly patrolled. It did not need to be. It existed the way gravity does, as a truth the body already understands. Men learned its distance the way you learn a stove's heat once, and then never again. In the quiet hours, before thirst stood up and asked its questions, you could almost forget it. But the body remembers what it is asked to survive, and memory keeps watch where no sentry stands. In the midst of this geometry of wood and warning, there was a different kind of line being drawn, thin, penciled, insistent. In a hut claimed by paper and will, a clerk named Dorrance Atwater bent over a ledger and wrote. He wrote the day's dead, one name per breath, one breath per line, each line a small bridge between someone's hours here and someone else's hours far away. He sharpened his pencil with a knife that had learned to be practical. He numbered graves that did not yet have stones, only markers that whispered in the heat. And because he had a stubborn fondness for truth, he kept a second copy of that list close, folded into the architecture of his shirt, hidden the way you hide a candle when the dark has opinions. There is a sound paper makes when it is used for mercy. It is not the crackle of new leaves or the flutter of banners. It is the steady hush of pages turning for work, the friction of graphite laying down the narrow road a name can walk on after the body has been persuaded to be still. Atwater listened to it every day. He wrote what he could: date, name, company, regiment, and when the name refused to come, he wrote the number only no less carefully, as if attention might coax identity out of silence later. Men passed his door and did not disturb him. They had learned that he was building a route for the living, the mothers and fathers and wives and children who were at that very hour setting plates at tables and counting steps on porches and correcting themselves mid-speech when a pronoun broke their heart. The ledger was not a book to be admired. It was a raft they would one day climb. So the men let him work, and the wind, taking a hint, turned the pages softly when the tent flap breathed. Some names Atwater wrote made a small chord with others that arrived by rumor. A corporal from Massachusetts who had written to the president about equal pay. A boy whose friend had promised to remember him exactly. A man known only by a nickname that pretended not to love him and did. Among the numbers he entered was one that would later be carved 3,585 for a soldier whose letters had travelled farther than his feet could now go. He wrote them all in the same tidy hand, because grief is not helped by favoritism. The list grew. It grew the way vines grow on warm brick, quietly, vigorously, perfecting the art of holding on. Beyond the wire and the heat and the arithmetic of days, the war argued with itself toward an ending. Flags tried on new meanings, orders tried on new tones. Somewhere in Washington, an office took shape around a lamp and an idea, the office of missing soldiers. A room that specialized in listening for footsteps that no one else could hear. There, a woman who had taught bandages to be brave, Clara Barton, collected letters as if they were seeds. Where is my son? Where does my husband sleep? Where shall I go with this question that does not tire? She sorted, answered, sent, and asked again. Her desk learned to carry a nation's share of the sentence please when the fighting's grammar finally ran out of conjunctions. Atwater carried his duplicate list out from the place that had tried to keep it. It travelled under cloth and breath and the ordinary courage of a young man who had decided that truth was worth the trouble of being careful. He brought it to the world that would need it. He put it in Barton's hands, the hands that had already learned the weight of strangers' names. The page met the palm and did what paper does when it is exactly where it belongs. It relaxed into usefulness. That summer of 1865, an expedition formed the kind not built of drums and flags, but of carpenters and clerks, painters and planters, teamsters and men who knew how to argue with weeds. They went to the Georgia field with Atwater's list, like a map of invisible roads. They walked the rows, counted, checked, verified, and listened to the ground with their eyes. They lifted temporary markers and set permanent ones, wood first, then later stone, until the geometry of loss had a legible grid. They wrote names wherever the ledger allowed, and numbers wherever the war had stolen the word. On a day so hot that even the flies confessed their sins, they raised a flag over the new Andersonville National Cemetery. It moved in air the way relief moves in a chest that has just finished crying. Barton stood in that sun with a ledger in her arms and a country at her shoulder. She read names to the men who were setting boards, and they answered with hammers their blows, spelling present. Families would come, in time, with letters folded along the old creases, and stand before a marker and speak to it as if it were a person. Because sometimes a piece of wood cut square and true is the most dependable listener in the world. They would leave flowers when they could, pebbles when they could not, and sometimes nothing at all but the warmth of their hands on the top edge, a touch that told the board the truth. You are not alone, and neither am I. There is an arithmetic to this work that does not show up in textbooks. One name written where none was expected is not equal to one. It multiplies backward and forward through kitchens where a plate can be set down with certainty. Through parlors, where a photograph's stare is no longer a question, but a greeting. Through churches, where a bell tolls exactly the intended number of times, and nobody stands correcting it under their breath. Atwater's careful pencil and Barton's determined lamp made those sums possible. For the men who would never step back across any porch, it was the only kind of homecoming still available, and it was enough to steady the living. The cemetery learned its manners quickly. It held its straight lines with quiet pride. The grass decided to be soft where sobbing knees would someday land. Birds, heedless of propriety, sang above names as if they had been hired for it. Letters, chiseled into boards and later into granite, settled into a calm that rainfall could not bully and sunlight could not bleach away. The place kept its promise to be a room with a ceiling the size of sky and a floor swept by seasons, where a nation might come and understand, without speeches, the difference between gone and lost. Atwater's own road was not immediately smooth. Truth, even after a war, has to explain itself to authority. But the lists survived the conversations they were made to endure. They were printed first as columns in a newspaper that understood how to use its ink for something cleaner than argument. Then as a booklet that could travel into parlors where relatives had trained themselves to listen for the postman's step. Fingers traced down the ranks of letters the way a rosary is thumbed, stopping at a name or a number that would have to do, and finding in that stop a new way to breathe. In Washington, the office of missing soldiers became a place where footsteps really did arrive, the cautious footfall of someone who had rehearsed bad news, and the lighter step of someone carrying a letter addressed by a familiar hand. Clerks learned to find the thread in a tangle. Barton learned to live with the kind of gratitude that makes you sit down suddenly. The lamps burned late, not from drama, but from arithmetic. This many letters, this many lists, this many names. Outside, the city experimented with peace, the smell of bakeries again, the cheerful nonsense of market cries, the relief of cobblestones, hearing only horses and not cannon. In Georgia, the cemetery's boards, weathered, then were replaced by stone, the names carved deeper into the practice of being remembered. Children, brought by parents who believed in honest pilgrimage, learned to whisper not out of fear but out of respect for lines. They asked small, sharp questions. Why so many from this place? Why so many numbers? What did they do wrong? And received the answer the fields had been practicing since the first marker was set. They did not do wrong. The world did, and then, in this small way, tried to do right. If you stand there at dusk, on that rise where the rows tilt into perspective and the pines keep their subtle vigil, you can hear a sound that is not the wind. It is the mathematics of the ledger at work, the constant addition and carrying of names to mouths, of loss to love, of silence to the exact syllables that free it. Somewhere along the rows you will come upon 3585 and say it as if calling someone in from the yard. The number will not answer. Numbers rarely do. But behind it a name will turn, the way names do, and you will know you have completed a task someone once begged the world to finish. Sometimes the caretakers find, tucked under a stone, a slip of paper with a modern hand on it, "We found you," or a tiny object left deliberately, a button from a reenactor's coat, a dried sprig of rosemary, a coin more for companionship than for myth. These are the little ceremonies the living invent when they need to be useful to the dead. They change nothing, and they change everything. Atwater's pencil rests now in a case somewhere, the wood darkened by the oils of work, the graphite shortened by names. Barton's lamp sits where it can be seen by school groups who do not yet know that light has a biography. The ledger itself exists in copies and scans and the grateful clutter of citations, safe from mice and mildew, safe from all the ways paper tells a story about vulnerability. Anyone with 10 quiet minutes and a willingness to bow to a screen can find the lists and their own heart in the same place and discover, perhaps to their surprise, that relief can arrive through the eyes. There are histories that prefer charge and countercharge, that keep a place for battles the way a mantle keeps a clock. This is not that history. This is the record of a hand that refused to let a day pass without escorting the day's losses as far as they could go toward home. It is the testimony of a woman who declined to be reasonable about lamps and lists and the dignity of naming. It is the proof that a pencil, a ledger, a flag, and the willingness to stand in heat with a hammer can take the teeth out of oblivion. And if not when, not always, just if the men whose names were written here do not return as some stories promise, returning in the steadiness of a bridge's hum or a kitchen's steam, then at least they return in the mouths of those who read them. That is a road as real as any plank laid across a winter river, as sturdy as any spoon held out to accept mercy. The ledger brought them home the way music brings a room to itself, not by force, not by spectacle, but by giving every note its name and refusing to forget how to sing. Night leans down over the cemetery like a mother into a cradle. The pines trade secrets with the stars, and the ground keeps its end of a bargain made when the first shovel cut the first neat bed. In a house many miles away, someone who has never seen this field writes an ancestor's name on a piece of paper and puts it on the refrigerator with a magnet shaped like a peach. It isn't much, it is everything. The ledger hums across the years as if the pencil was still in motion. The pages turn themselves in the wind and settle again. The rows wait for morning and for footsteps and for voices soft enough to belong. Chapter 7. The Hill That Spoke in Light Little Round Top. 1863. Dusk came to the ridge like a schoolteacher who knows the names of clouds. It set its books down on the granite and took attendance. Oak, laurel, boulder, fern. Wind from the wheat field, wind from the orchard. Breath of men who had earned the right to be quiet. All day the hill had listened to hooves and iron, to cries that did not need translation, to the ragged grammar of battle as it rewrote itself across the map. Now, at last, evening lifted a finger and the noise learned its manners. On the crown of Little Round Top, a signal station stood, no great tower, just poles and lines, and the patience of men taught to make messages from air. They wore their blue the way the hill wore its green without boasting. Their kit was plain. Flags for daylight, torches for night, a glass that could pull a far hill closer, a pad for numbers that behaved themselves, and a small book that knew which motion meant which letter in the wigwag code invented by a doctor who believed the sky could be trained to speak. They had practiced their craft on parade grounds, on sea beaches, on rooftops where gulls mocked them. War had given them a different classroom. Our watchman tonight, unknown, uncoffed. The kind of soldier the hill keeps when brass forgets, lifts a flag. While there is still milk in the light, the fabric answers the wind's polite questions. One swing to the left, a pause. One to the right, a lower arc. A check at center where stillness becomes punctuation. Across the basin, on Cemetery Hill, another flag nods that it understands. Between them, the air turns into a long wire no one can cut. The message is not drama. It is housekeeping for armies. A query, an answer, a warning softened by speed. Far to the south Culp's Hill blinks to, and somewhere the cupola of the Lutheran seminary still remembers the day's noon when flags looked like prayer. Downslope, the rock ledges hold the day's heat long enough to make a bench of it. The 20th Maine has already carved its sentence hard against a charging paragraph. The wheat field still thinks it is wheat, and has not yet learned its new vocabulary. The hill is a hinge. Its small bones hold a large door. A flag on its summit, this simple stick and cloth has become the voice of a hinge that swings a country toward morning. The last light thins to silk. The flag comes in, folded like a swallow's wing. The torches are readied cylinders of willing fire, whose tongues know the alphabet. They are mounted on staffs, so that flame can draw letters in the dark. 1, 2, 3, the motions the code demands. Not a dance, not a threat, only clarity. When they are lit, the hill learns new constellations. The watcher feels the small heat reach his knuckles and thinks, as anyone would, of kitchens. The night, with dignified curiosity, leans closer to see what will be said. Ready, the sergeant whispers. Meaning both? The station beyond the valley that has trimmed its wicks, and the station here that has decided not to be afraid of brightness. The first torched word crosses the space. Hold. Not a sermon, not a speech. A one-syllable bridge. A reply returns. Holding. The wind approves. A bat makes a contrary loop and then agrees to ignore utility for the rest of the night. The code travels by angles and patience. Left is 1, right is 2, down is 3. The motions a practiced arm can make without consulting muscle or moon. Numbers become letters. Letters remember to be sentences. Once or twice, the watcher's hand hesitates, not from doubt, but from respect. Even good news should not hurry in a war. He lifts, lowers, checks, and the hill learns to speak as quietly as light will allow. Messages go to Meade's headquarters. Others wink southward to pickets, who stand thin as fence posts against the late breeze. Others travel sideways to batteries that are learning to fire at shadows without making widows of trees. The lamp's glass seeks out an answering flame, finds it, and the whole country seems for a moment to be a porch where neighbors talk in a code no thief can steal. There were stories already, the afternoon's signalers with flags by day, directing a long look to the right where trouble had an appetite. A message sent under fire while shells tried to erase syllables from the sky. Some said Confederate gunners tried to shoot the flags out of the air, and perhaps they did. It is the habit of war to mistake language for target. But the code had learned to be humble. It did not insist on spectacle. It asked only for a clear line and a wrist that could keep time. Our watcher writes between transmissions, pencil short, paper stubborn. He notes the timing, the direction, the weather, because weather is half of any truth told outdoors. He writes the small mercy of a breeze that blows smoke sideways and lets the torches speak without coughing. He writes the name of the man across the valley who is answering tonight, a surname caught and corrected, because accuracy is tenderness in this craft. He writes the hour he thinks the hill began to feel like itself again. Moon at shoulder, guns asleep, not as poetry, but because some facts required their own vocabulary. Below, the rocks find a comforter of dew. Little Round Top becomes what it was before the war learned its name, a listening place. But the torches keep their grammar, and the night does not mind. Once a courier stumbles up the path and hands off a paper that wants to jump the queue. The signal sergeant reads, nods, and the watcher turns his wrist a fraction to make room in the system for urgency. He is not a hero, he is a hinge. The message goes, a pause, an answer returns. The hill exhales like an old dog settling under a table. Sometimes the work is dull and therefore honorable. Resupply goes across and is answered by on the road. Sometimes it is fearful and therefore quick. Movement on your left becomes seen strength uncertain. Once, in the long middle, when the air has the feel of a church after everyone has left. A small word travels for no one in particular water, and 2 stations away someone answers with the soft practicality that keeps armies real. Spring below wall, the watcher smiles. Not every message changes history. Some simply lengthen a particular life. Near midnight, cloud decides to make grammar of the moon. The torches throw their line a little further to be sure of themselves. Bright beads on an invisible stitch. The code, which is not fragile, adjusts. A lantern by the watcher's boot shows a moth how to be mistaken and brave. He warns it off with a finger the size of mercy. It ignores him. They share the light a while, pupil and ember. The hill has its private sounds. Rock cooling, grass gossiping, leather learning the shape of a knee. From time to time, the watcher hears a note from the band at Cemetery Hill, some musician practicing a hymn under his breath. The horn as shy of midnight as any man should be. The tune is an apology and a promise. We will be careful, we will be kind, as if the hill could be persuaded to forgive what it saw at noon. The torch answers with a practical sentence about pickets returning at 2. The hymn minds its business. There is, on nights like this, the temptation to think of home. Our watcher does not resist it. He imagines a door left unlocked, a lamp turned low in a kitchen that knows coffee even at unreasonable hours. A child whose breath rehearses the future without any lines to learn. He does not allow the picture to stop his hand. He lets it make the hand truer. In the next exchange, his letters are so exact that the man across the valley writes, "Fine a praise, so spare it must be genuine, toward morning." The eastern sky makes its ordinary miracle. The seam between night and a paler word opens with the care of a seamstress who does not want to waste thread. The torches, having done their night shift, hiss when they are thanked with breath. The flag comes out again, folded and raised, a diurnal resurrection that requires only wind and a wrist. The watcher's arm has learned to speak the day's dialect. He swings, checks, pauses. Brighter stations wake and answer. The hill, which has been eloquent all night, allows the birds to take over the conversation. A courier arrives with a bundle of messages written plainly, a relief from angels. The watcher hands them to the sergeant and rubs his shoulder with the ignorant gratitude any muscle shows when it is given back to itself. He looks once more across the Basin Cemetery Hill, Culp's Hill, the far roofs stitching their own ideas into the horizon, and feels that soft vow a place makes when it has kept its end of a bargain. The bargain was simple. Say what must be said without breaking the sky. The hill agreed. The men agreed. The night proved a trustworthy page. By noon the station will come down for a while, so that gunsmoke does not slander it. By afternoon it will be up again, stiff with the tired honor of a tool that refuses to rest merely because someone else has. Someone will sketch the code in a margin of a map. Someone will write a letter home that mentions lamps on the hill like cautious stars. Someone will forget to eat until a friend tells him his hand is shaking, and then they will share a biscuit and laugh as if the world could stand such lightness, which it can, sometimes. If our watcher does not return, if another hill further on claims him for its own story, then the language will remember him. Posts will stand in quiet weather and feel, now and then, the exact weight of his hand. Flags will, in some future reenactor's grasp, find the true arc with an accuracy that startles an audience. A museum torch in a glass case will hold the reflection of a visitor's face, as if testing whether it recognizes someone it loved. The code itself, a small republic of angles and pauses, will survive long enough to teach lesser crises how to behave. For now, Before day fills its lungs, keep a picture on your pillow. A ridge, speaking in light, men listening with their eyes, sentences sewn across night with a hot needle, a flag by morning doing the clean work of clarity where powder had preferred confusion, a wrist that never lied, a hill that learned to translate. Below, in the town's prudent grid, doors will open, some still willing, some chastened. Somewhere, in a museum we have not found yet, a small drawer will slide open and yield a pocket notebook with numbers that once meant letters, that once meant mercy, and the night no longer afraid of its own size will step back, letting day try again with the quiet bravery that only follows exhaustion. Night loosens the knots of the day and sets them neatly on the windowsill. The map, much handled, finally lies flat. Somewhere a kettle hums the key of mercy. Somewhere a porch light keeps a polite vigil for footsteps that will not come. All we have carried photograph and letter, plank and lashing, ladle and ledger. Torch and flag finds its places again, each small tool lying down with the dignity of work completed. If you listen closely, the stories speak to one another across the dark, like neighbors on facing porches. From Gettysburg, a picture of 3 children, Frank, Frederick. Alice goes on doing its gentle labor, reminding the world that a paper window can become a door. From the tents of the 54th Massachusetts, a letter written with a sailor's steadiness still knocks on the desks of power until fairness answers, if late, then nonetheless. Over the Rappahannock, a winter bridge hums the low note of wood and iron agreeing to carry more than their share. In the kitchen where the Sanitary Commission taught soup to forgive a day, steam folds itself away and the spoons rest with the self-respect of honest metal. In the red heat of Georgia, a ledger leaves itself open, names lined like returning footsteps, while a lamp, Clara's lamp, behaves like a star that prefers close work. And on Little Round Top, the night remembers the shape of sentences sewn in fire. A hill translating light with a wrist that never lied. All of them together form a kind of countryside the atlas forgot to draw. A republic of small decencies, bordered by careful hands. In that country, memory is not loud, it is accurate. It sits at tables, straightens labels, checks knots, counts spoons, underlines names, trims wicks, and turns boots, just so, toward a door that stays willing. It grants the unknown soldiers the return that remains, the return of their quiet uses. A bridge steadied, a bowl refilled, a name spoken, a letter taught, a lantern raised. Perhaps you are tired now. Lay the photograph on the mantel. It knows its place. Fold the letter and let the crease be a promise kept. Rinse the ladle and set it upside down to dry, so tomorrow's broth will taste only of mercy. Touch the ledger's margin with 2 fingers, as if blessing the pencil that did not flinch. Set the mallet where it cannot roll, like a lullaby with weight to it. Snuff the torch with a careful breath, then leave the flag where wind can find it in the morning. And before you turn out your own lamp, open the door an inch, the old custom against loneliness, and let the night pass through, unafraid. Should the world wake you later with its noisy arithmetic, this many battles, that many graves, answer softly with another kind of sum. One father's picture building rooms, one regiment's letter teaching law, one engineer's not keeping a crossing honest, one kitchen's lemon keeping scurvy at bay, one clerk's list escorting the lost, one hill's light keeping a line unbroken. This is how a nation learns to sleep without forgetting. Now draw the quilt up to your chin. Let the river keep its own steady counsel. Let the bridge hold. Let the field learn again the grammar of wheat. Let the kitchen corners cool to comfort. Let the ledger rest its spine. Let the hill turn its face toward birdsong. And let the unnamed hands, those careful, unsung keepers of the day, find the rest they earned, their tools dreaming them back with gratitude. And so the night falls quiet, carrying their whispers into silence. If you enjoyed this tale, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, so you never miss another whisper in the night. Until we meet again, good night.